Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar titled Driving Continuous Process Improvement with SharePoint. Our webinar should run approximately 1 hour and we will be highlighting the features and functionality of the Winshuttle workflow product. Let's quickly run through the agenda of our webinar. First we will have our introduction, then Rick Hawk, a Winshuttle and Adaptive customer, will present on how they have benefit from working with Adaptive to eliminate waste in their business process. Then Derek, Adaptive's technical resource, will go through a demonstration of the product highlighting the features and functionality. Then we will wrap up to answer any questions you may have. Please provide your questions in the chat window provided by the GoToWebinar panel. My name is Teresa Wood and I'm from Adaptive Corporation, and my focus is primarily on automating business processes and creating smarter workflows throughout organizations. I could be utilized for customer sales and support. Our guest speaker from Kitzler Lighting is Rick Hawk. Rick has been an Adaptive customer for several years and will be joining us today to present his story of implementing Winshuttle. And last, my partner and co-host today from our technical division is Derek Meeting. Derek is one of our principal consultants and has 12 years of experience in the business process and software planning support sector. Adaptive Corporation's mission is to provide our clients with tools and support expertise they need in order to collaborate and enhance their overall operation. We work with clients to help them create and build electronic workflows that are typically paper-based and manual processes today. We can provide 24/7 remote and on-site support, training, and project management for all of our product portfolio. We cover all of North America with presence in Canada, and we are dedicated to increasing workplace efficiencies throughout your organization. Now it's time for us to get a little feedback and information from you. On your screen is our first poll question. We'll give everyone 10 seconds to provide an answer. Give us a minute to display the results. And it looks like the results are in. It looks like we've got quite a variety of different ways that people are doing their business processes today. Thank you for voting, everyone. And now we have one last question for our audience to help better understand how we can provide the most value. Question is, do you currently have an active project that pertains to business process automation? We'll give everyone 10 seconds again to provide an answer. Give us a minute to display the results. And the results are in. Thank you again, everyone, for voting. Your feedback is appreciated and helps us further assist our customers. Now I would like to go ahead and pass the baton over to Rick Hawk from Kitzler Lighting, who is actively working with the Winshuttle application and how they have implemented it throughout their organization. Rick?
Okay, hey, thank you. What I'd like to do first is kind of give you a little background on who Kitzler Lighting is. As soon as the poll question switches here, I got that right page? Okay, let's roll on to the next slide. Okay, Kitzler Lighting. Our company, we design and contract residential lighting, primarily in the North American market space. We have 4 locations, and those are located in Cleveland. We've got 1 in Connecticut, 1 in Georgia, and 1 in Las Vegas. The 2 last ones are DCs only. So we don't have office personnel and a lot of things going on at those spaces. Give you a general idea of the type of business we are. We do a lot of orders per day, about 1,000 per day. We have about 6,000 finished product active stock keeping units. And there's about 400 people that work at Kitzler. So there's a lot of activity going on. Little background behind the scenes on that. We have the classic ERP and all the other systems you need for your order to cash, purchase to pay, and your mega processes. So we're not lacking in that space, but we obviously wanted to get invested in some workflow and some automation because we really focus on white-collar automation here at Kichler. Got a lot of engineers, designers, business leaders, and that type of stuff. So you'll see some activities that we're working on that'll focus on that area too. Go to the next slide, please. So our first business problem that we address with Winshuttle is credit memos. We do about 5,000 credit memos per year at Kichler, and our current cycle time before we implemented this process took about 2 weeks. It was paper-based, move around the classic inbox style. People would fill out information, and it would recycle back because it was incomplete or incorrect. When it was all said and done, 10 working days later, the credit would be posted to the customer's account. One of the drawbacks to that is the customer would call during that 10-day window because they would be able to take a look at their online statements and see that the credit had not been posted, which was obviously a phone call that should not have happened. It was a waste of picking it up. And also this process involved 40 people and 2 departments. So it had quite a bit of complexity to it. So if we can roll to the next slide. The business solution. We put together a team which involved the customer service managers, the credit managers, our credit specialists, and a business analyst. And we took, using Winshuttle, we developed the form. It took us about 3 weeks and 26 revisions, but don't let that scare you. That's mostly learning curve of us just getting familiar with what the tool can do. Workflow development, also about 2 weeks to get that figured out, and 17 revisions. Again, we used this first workflow to train ourselves on how the product worked. And so that was mostly learning curve. And the implementation method, we did it via pilot. We trained a few people. We did a few of our credit memos. We looked at them intently each day and kind of made some adjustments to the form or to the flow until we thought we had it figured out. Okay, we go to the next slide. So what was the results? Well, our cycle time went from 2 weeks to less than 48 hours. Our customers who used to call because they would take a look at their online statements really don't have time to call anymore. So the amount of phone calls asking about did their credit get applied is virtually gone away. We do have process metrics in the database for the first time. Our value-added steps are significantly reduced, and obviously we'll get through that, how that happened. And our non-value-added steps have been eliminated, and we had plenty. Obviously with the 2 week cycle time, there was stuff going on that just didn't add any value to it. And our queue times have been significantly reduced. We'll go to the next slide. So what are the overall results? Well, Kichler produces about 19 credit memos each day. Unfortunately, that's 19 errors. I mean, the good news is we can do credit memos and do them well. The bad news is we still have some issues to deal with because we should not be processing credits. Credits are usually a function of some other issue. So we use the database to analyze and group the reasons for credit memos. And now Kichler has the ability, using Pareto analysis, to start to figure out what are the root causes, implement those corrective actions, and then actually measure our corrective actions fixing it. Because our ultimate goal is to do less credit memos. We can get the population of 5,000 credit memos a year down to 2,000 and then cut that in half again the next year. That's the whole idea of our continuous process improvement. And Winshuttle gives us an excellent ability to be able to see what we're doing, measure it, and improve it. So here's just an example of the process work list that the customer service team leads take a look at. And they're able to see any credit memo or any requests for product or bill only. We've got a whole bunch of workflows running through this department at one time, where they're at, who has it, what's the task, and how long it's been working. So now we can actually manage our queues. Go to the next slide, please. And briefly, I just want you to take a look at the form. Form is over to the right. We've created some standards so that each one of our forms, the beauty of this thing is we just modeled our existing form, so training was very minimal. Just to give you an idea, the form ensures complete and accurate data. The queries are direct into our ERP. We happen to use PeopleSoft. So you put in the invoice number, all of the relevant data pops right back. There's nothing that has to be typed. If it's already in our database somewhere, we're able to reuse that to improve the accuracy of the form. And the routing actually is conditional, so there's people who don't need to see it. If the rules don't tell them to, the workflow makes it go that way. So we can go to the next page. We'll take a look at the actual workflow. So this workflow has evolved to allow processes to move through a flow. Lots of transitions. You can see decision boxes. Just to give you an idea, this flow to cycle through the building. And we also we kind of learned that we end up using rework loops instead of approval steps. That's just a technique that over time you'll figure out that's fundamentally where you want to be. Almost all steps are reworks. Very few of them are accept or reject. On to the next slide, please. I talked about process metrics, and for the first time, Kitzer can see what we're actually doing. And the old adage, you can't improve what you can't measure. Well, we flipped it to the positive. You can improve what you can measure. And let's tell you a little side story on this. They take a look at these steps and what the tasks are, and they started comparing the common task amongst multiple different people performing that task. And the management team was actually able to see that some people could do this task in so many hours. But this one person was like 3 times the amount of cycle time to get that work done. And it was very interesting. They sat down with the person and kind of did a little interview going, what's going on? Well, you know, why does this take in 30 hours on average for your task and everybody else is getting it done in like 10 hours? And what they found was that person was actually batching her work, and she was performing her tasks on Tuesdays and Thursdays because she's always done it that way. It felt very personally efficient. And that type of stuff. Until you have these type of measurements, you really can't get a feel for how things are flowing and who's actually performing the work. Real quick discussion, and she goes, okay, and then now she just does 20 minutes of her work every day, and her cycle time is just like everybody else's. So little stuff like that, little tiny bits of information that you'll see in these metrics that really give your process analysts and your managers the ability to see what's going on. Okay, we can move on to our second business problem. What we have is our customers have products, lighting, and as LED and various other different systems of lighting come into the market space, there are more and more technical questions that are coming into play. And our customer service reps will handle technical questions over the phone. Sometimes they can answer them, but a lot of times they can't. And so the old process is they used to capture the information, and then they would send the question on in the email to somebody to think they could answer it, and then that person would forward the email to somebody else. And the current process was in such a state we really couldn't even measure what the cycle time was. We know questions were being asked. We weren't even sure what our turnaround time was, and we also were kind of embarrassed to say that along the way some questions got lost or didn't get answered. And so we took a look at this process, which involved 50 people across 4 departments, and said, well, let's build a form, let's build a workflow, and let's handle this in a quality way with Winshuttle. So we move to the next slide. The business solution, very similar to the first one, we put together a team, and the team included our customer service managers and our technical support reps, where they're the folks that tend to have a deeper knowledge of the product, our product managers, our engineers, and a business analyst. And we developed a new form, which we happen to call the PHR, Product Help Request. We developed a new workflow, and we did the same thing. We implemented in a pilot. We did a few each day with a few people that were trained, got feedback on the form and the flow, made some adjustments. And this one, I want to say we probably only spent about a week figuring it out, and this workflow went live. So let's move on to the next slide. And the results, the good news is all of our questions are now tracked. We're ending up answering technical questions about 30 per week, and no one thought we had that many. And the process metrics are now in the database. And what's also unique is our technical support reps will take common questions and they'll add them to a typical SharePoint list called the question and answer database so that the CSRs can use it. So before a CSR will even open up a new product help request, they'll just do a search, through the search box on the question and answer list and see if someone's already asked the same question about the same LED light that they specifically want to do something slightly different with, and see if that answer has already been given. And the queue times have been significantly reduced. Go on to the next slide. We can get into the form. And here you'll see that we have a similar looking form. In the body is mostly open text because that's what you get with technical questions. Lots of words and you're not exactly sure how the answer is going to go. A little checkbox in the middle of the form which asks the customer service reps, did you look at handouts? Did you look it up in our catalog? Did you look at the Q&A database and so on, to make sure that the customer service rep is trying to handle that question at the first level or level 1 before they escalate it. The form ensures completeness of information again. The conditional routings move it around the building instead of to the product manager, to the engineer or whoever that disposition may be. And CSRs are to use the frequently asked questions or that Q&A database first to try and, again, to eliminate creating a question that has already been answered. We've got to go to the next page or to the next slide. The workflow is far simpler. It has some reiteration to it, where the question's asked to the technical service rep, and it may go back to the person who asked the question for more clarification. But the workflow is very simple to develop. It evolves. It allows things to flow through, again, on conditional values. And we built it with reroute or with the rework loop in mind instead of approve and reject. And then on to our next slide. The one thing that at the end of this whole process is our FAQ, which is managed by our technical support reps after the PHR is complete. And the golden nugget here is we ask a question, we have it documented, it's in the list, and then the TSR using judgment goes, that's a good one. That's going to be a common question. Let's add it to our Q&A database. And then when our customer service reps, which we have 28 of them, when they get questions and they type those keywords in, if it's already been answered, then they can answer consistently the same way to multiple customers over a length of time. And if we move on to the next slide, our third business process that we elected to talk about today. And at Kistler, I want you to be aware that we have 17 workflows running right now. And actually, at the end of this meeting, I'm on my way to announcing a pilot. We're going to be doing our 18th workflow. So we found that this is really a very, very good tool for us. And we use that. We use it, I want to say, all the time. We use it wherever the ERP does not have a patented process, where things start to work into forms, when things go into the email abyss. As soon as we start hearing about that, we really take a look at it and say, let's build a Winshuttle workflow and let's get this thing figured out. So our next business process here was the product request from stock. And a product for us is fixtures, our light fixtures. Departments request stock for all sorts of reasons. And inventory control has to make sure that we've got enough stock to cover that reason and not leave our customers outstanding. And then the warehouse also has to be able to know exactly where to drop the product off. And occasionally, a request that was asked for gets left to the side or forgotten about. So that was our business problem. Our business solution is we put together a team, customer service, new form, which we call the FRQ, fixture request, and then we developed a new workflow for it, and we implemented again using a pilot. We move on to the results section for this one. What we have to be able to say now is that all of our fixture requests are now tracked. We are getting about 20 requests for fixtures a week, and no one thought we had that many. Does that kind of sound familiar? The same thing happened with our last process. We couldn't even measure it, and we weren't even sure how frequent it was. Well, we're doing about 20 fixtures a week. The process metrics are in the database. The warehouse knows exactly where to deliver it because it's prescribed in the form before they even get it. And the queue times of requesting for the fixture until it's delivered is significantly reduced. So if we take a look at a form, it probably looks like all of your stock requests if you guys are in an inventory type business or business model. Also, what's unique about this, it has all the cost accounting associated with it. So where does the cost of that fixture get consumed and all that stuff in the background. So this is a very robust form that really answers where did the product go, who paid for it, what was the reason code, is it a cost of quality measure, is it a replacement because of a shipping error, whatever the reason is for this fixture request. The form ensures complete and accurate information, and requests are only filled when stock is sufficient. We don't want to ever pull the one remaining piece when a customer who's going to pay us for the product is waiting for it. So obviously we keep that in mind too. The workflow itself here is very straightforward. What you'll see in this one here is it also includes towards the bottom a swim lane for packaging. Sometimes we take the product, we break it down into pieces, parts, and pack it up so that it gets to the customer appropriately. And so if there's special instructions that go along with that, we get conditional routing to the right folks, especially for packaging. So let's move on to the results page. And it's actually the unexpected results. We expected the results of a fast cycle time, accurate delivery, proper cost accounting. But think about this. This is part of the database when we fill out these fixture requests that the quality department said, hey, this is great. What could you do with information like this? Customer claims that all the threads were too short to attach to finial. Now, if that same product across that same manufacturer lot has the same request about 2 or 3 times in a row, now you've got some actionable items on the quality side that we never really expected. Now, when we tried to resolve, when we put this form together, this is one of those things where you get that aha moment at the end and go, well, look at that. We've got some information here, and our quality department logs in, they take a look at these things, and they use this type of info to take action and take a look at product, get a hold of our manufacturer, and see if there's something to change and to obviously improve the overall quality. I want to move to the wrap up here. I want to give you in summary, Kichler has really enjoyed using this product. We investigated it. We used it in a pilot. Once we did our first workflow, the rest of them have been just coming out naturally. The key to us where we want to find is anytime we take a look at product and we see paper and long lead times to get the stuff done, we immediately think this is good. This is a good spot for a Winshuttle and a workflow. So with that, we'll transition over to Derek, who will actually get you a little bit more into the product.
Thanks a bunch, Rick. So we want to go through and do a demo of Winshuttle workflow. We've got about a half hour of the webinar left. We'll take about 20 minutes, and then we'll leave a couple minutes at the end for questions. Teresa mentioned at the beginning that if you have any questions, there's a chat window on the side, and you can type them in there. Then at the end, Teresa can start asking me some of those questions, and I will discuss those. So we're going to talk a little bit, first of all, about some of the technical requirements and issues with Winshuttle workflow. We'll then get into a little bit about the design. So Rick mentioned about creating their forms and creating their workflows. We'll take a little bit of time and show you how that's done. And then we'll actually see a process in action, and that'll allow us to show you some of the more features and functions of Winshuttle workflow. Winshuttle workflow runs on top of SharePoint. So as you probably know, SharePoint has a workflow engine built in. But if you've done much work with the workflow engine in SharePoint, you also know that it's pretty limited on what you can do with it. In fact, if you want to do anything more than very simple workflows, you end up doing Visual Studio, which is programming. And the theme of our discussion today is about using this product for continuous process improvement. And if you can imagine, every time you wanted to improve a process or make a change to a process, if you had to go out and hire a programmer to do that, that can be a very lengthy as well as expensive task. So the idea of Winshuttle workflow is allow us to create these very complex workflows, to be able to make changes quickly and easily. And as Rick mentioned, they're able to stand up workflow 17 today, coming up on 18 workflows really very quickly without much, if any, assistance from someone from the outside. So Winshuttle workflow will then allow us to augment what we do with SharePoint to create a better workflow design and a workflow processing experience. But the beauty of it is because it still is SharePoint, everything that you're doing is in SharePoint. And as you know, SharePoint has lots of wonderful capabilities. Rick, for example, talked about the ability to create like an FAQ and for people to do a search in there. And so we're not taking information and storing it somewhere else. We're storing it in SharePoint. Rick talked about the ability to look at some of the metrics and try to figure out where there's bottlenecks. I'll show you some of that as we go through the demo. So because everything that we're doing is being stored inside of SharePoint, we've got all the capabilities that SharePoint brings to the table available to us. Real quick, Winshuttle Workflow runs on top of all the versions that are of SharePoint that are out there. That includes 2003, 7, and 10. Most of you are probably on 2007 or 10. It also includes all the different licenses of SharePoint. So there's the free version, which in 2007 was called WSS. In 2010, it's called Foundation, and also the standard as well as the enterprise version. Winshuttle Workflow works on top of those. In fact, everything I'm going to show you is identical, even if you're on the free version of SharePoint. So there's no need to upgrade or have a paid version of SharePoint. If you want to do complex workflows, you can do those with what we have in Winshuttle Workflow. So let's talk about what a workflow is in the language of Winshuttle. A workflow really consists of two components. You've got a form, and then you've got the workflow. Rick showed us a couple screenshots of some of their forms as well as some of their workflows. The forms are designed inside of Microsoft InfoPath. Now, InfoPath is not a tool that Winshuttle created. It's a tool that's been around for about a decade. And the whole point of of InfoPath is to create forms. And so Winshuttle said, well, instead of building our own tool, we'll just use the kind of industry standard that's out there. So use InfoPath to create these forms. And you can create some pretty complex forms. You can create some very simple forms. The form that I have up here is for an employee onboarding or a new hire request. And you'll notice we've got things like a date field. There's a requested by field. You can see I've done some color coding. For example, my yellow fields indicate that a field is required. Some fields are drop down. Some fields are check boxes and so on. So you can create this form to look pretty intuitive. Rick mentioned that with their one form, their credit memo request, that they were able to create an online form that looked much like the previous paper form. And so he used the phrase that they had very little user training because of that. And so that's the idea. If we can create a form that's very intuitive, then when we start to bring people up on it, there's very little training involved. The other thing that's so nice about creating these forms is it's very easy to start to enforce business rules and requirements. For example, you would never want to hire a person where we didn't indicate their first and last name. So I can go in here and by simply checking a box that says cannot be blank, I can indicate that this is a required field. And now what happens is if someone tries to submit this process without filling in that field, it simply won't let them. So instead of the process getting down to a certain point and now hitting a bottleneck because data is missing, how much better would it be to make sure that the data is there right from the get-go? And so you can create these very intuitive and easy-to-use forms inside of InfoPath. We're not going to get into a lot of discussion about what happens inside of InfoPath, but I will add this. In addition to the features and functions that InfoPath gives you out of the box, Winshuttle has enhanced InfoPath. So over the years, Winshuttle has found that there are things that either InfoPath can't do, or maybe it can do, but it requires some programming or a little bit more technical ability than they want to put in front of most of their customers. So Winshuttle has added these things, we call them custom controls, into InfoPath that allow us to do some very interesting things with our form. As I go through the demo, you're actually going to see some of those custom controls in action, and I'll point them out to you. But the point is, even if someone is an expert and very good at using InfoPath, adding Winshuttle on top of it can make that form design experience better and faster in many cases. So there's the form. Then we also have the workflow itself, and that's created inside of a tool that we call the Designer. And the purpose of the Designer is simply to lay out your workflows. You note these are the same screens that you saw in the screenshots that Rick had of their processes. Basically, our workflows are laid out in the form of swim lane diagrams. So each of these colored bands that you see represent a role within the workflow. And then the different shapes are activities. And then, of course, the lines are the transitions. And anytime you see a line cross a colored band, you know it's moving from one person to another person. Every now and again, you'll see a transition that has some text on it. That would be a condition. So, for example, if the manager chooses to approve it, it will go down here to HR. However, if he chooses to reject it, it goes over to the right. The same thing happens to HR. And so you can create, Rick mentioned this, that we can have conditions within our workflow so that things flow down different paths. So, for example, you may have a process, take an expense report, for example, and if the amount of the reimbursement is greater than a certain amount, or possibly if there's travel on the expense report. You want to flow it to different people, you can do that within the workflow. And the beauty of this is that these workflows are very easy to create. You certainly don't have to be a highly technical or a programmer to create these workflows. In fact, as Rick mentioned, at their company, they have business analysts creating them. Now, their business analysts are technical people, but they're not programmers by any stretch of the imagination, and so they can go in and create these workflows. So let me just give you a quick scenario of how you might do this. You notice that we've got these swim lanes. Let's say we wanted to add a new participant to our workflow. Maybe if we hire the person and they're going to be an officer of the company, or they're going to have access to confidential data, we want to get executive approval for this workflow. So that's a very simple thing to do. I've got a list of all the swim lanes that are out there. I can go in and add a new swim lane, simply give it a title for the swim lane, and then we can do some user assignments. So how do we want to assign the user to this swim lane? I mentioned that these swim lanes represent roles within your workflow, and sometimes different people fill different roles based on conditions. For example, you think of like an employee hire process. The manager swim lane, we're always going to have a manager, but it's a different manager depending on the department we're hiring the guy into. If it's customer service, it's one manager. If it's HR, it's another manager. And so there's different ways that we can assign users to these swim lanes. There's about a dozen different ways you can assign users, including things like looking up information in Active Directory, connecting to an external database, or you can do what we'll do in this demo, in this case, which is something you probably wouldn't do in production, but you could just hard code a user in there as well. So we can add a swim lane for the executive to do some work, and we want to give the executive the ability to approve a process here, so we'll just simply draw an activity in there. It comes in with the default name. Let's rename it to Executive Review. And so now we've got a task for an executive to review the process. Now, we want it to go to the executive if the user that we're hiring is going to have access to confidential or financial data. So coming right out of the start node, we want it to go down to the executive, but we said that there's only certain conditions when we want it to go to that executive. And so we can put conditions on this transition. It's real simple to do. We simply go in and choose that we want to evaluate a field, and that field is called confidential. So all I have to do is simply right-click, and it shows me all of the fields from my form. I've got a field called confidential, and if that equals true, I want to head down that path. This path will be if confidential equals false, so we'll put a condition on there. We also have a function that we call otherwise, which is a kind of a catch-all, and we'll throw that on there. What are we going to do if the executive chooses to approve it? Well, if he approves it, we'll send it up to the manager, like the rest of them. And if he rejects it, we'll send it to the same place all the other rejections are going, which is over there to that collector. And then we put a couple conditions on there. That one goes if it's rejected. This one goes if it's approved. So it's very simple. So you can see in just a matter of a couple seconds, we've went through and added a new swim lane, added an activity, added conditions. It's a very simple thing to do. Creating a new notification, for example. So we want to send out emails throughout the process. In this case, we're going to send out an email at the very end of the process to let the originator know that his employee has been hired. And so we can just simply put a notification activity in there and then type the body of the email for us. So in this case, it's going to say something like, we're pleased to inform you that the new employee hire request for, and then it's got a variable where it will throw his name. And those variables are real easy. A simple right-click shows you all of the form variables. So we've got one called new employee name. So you could do something like his new manager is, and then we want to put the department manager's name in there. So we have a field called department manager, and it would put his new manager's name is whatever. And so again, the point is we can create these workflows very quickly, and we can do it without any programming or requiring a large amount of technical ability. Now, Rick mentioned in a couple of his slides how many revisions of forms and workflows they went through. And he didn't mention this, but I know I've talked to him in the past, and he's told me this, that a lot of those revisions took place in minutes. So in other words, the business analyst would sit down with the business process owner and would say, does this look right? And the person would say, well, no, not quite. Can you change this or change that? And immediately, the business analyst could make the change, whether it was adding a field to the form or whether it was adding a new swim lane or adding a new activity or a condition in the workflow. And the beauty of that is, again, we're talking about continuous process improvement. So here we've got the person that knows the process inside and out, the business process owner, sitting alongside the business analyst, and together they're building this process. It's not a matter of someone having to type up a specification, hand it off to a developer, have them write some code, give it back and see if it works. It's actually, they were working hand in hand making these revisions. And so the business process owner could suggest a change, and within minutes, they were actually piloting and testing out that change to see if it's what they wanted. So anyhow, that gives you a little bit of a feel for what it takes to create one of these processes. Let's take a couple minutes and see one in action. We're not going to go through the whole thing in the interest of time, but we'll go through a couple steps of this process so you get an idea of what it looks like. So how does someone go about kicking off a workflow inside of SharePoint if they want to kick off a Winshuttle workflow? Well, there's a number of ways that they can do it, but probably the most common way is right through a hyperlink. So I'm logged in as a guy by the name of Mike, and I want to kick off a new hire request. So I navigate over to the HR site, and you see I have a link here called Click Here to start a new employee hire request. Now, by the way, the ability to kick off a new process or the ability to see processes that are out there, that's all handled by SharePoint security. So SharePoint has its own security engine. It's a very robust security engine. It should be able to allow you to do anything you need to do. And so if we didn't want Mike the ability to kick off new hire requests or to see requests that are out there, you simply use SharePoint to trim that security so he doesn't have that level of authority. In this case, Mike does, so he can simply click on that hyperlink, and what's going to happen is that form that you saw a moment ago in InfoPath is going to be displayed as a browser-based form right inside of Internet Explorer. So Mike doesn't need any special software. He doesn't need anything installed on his machine. All he needs is access to SharePoint and the ability to go to a particular hyperlink, and he can get what he needs to. And this goes back to what we talked about earlier about very little, if any, user training. I would expect most of your users know how to click on a hyperlink, and if they can do that, well, they can simply go in and start to fill out one of these forms. So here's that form we saw a moment ago inside of the browser. You'll notice a few things about the form. For example, it's automatically filled in the current date as well as my name. It also went out and connected to Active Directory and got my title as well as my phone number. Rick alluded to this earlier. You can use the form to connect to other systems. In this case, I'm connecting to Active Directory. Rick pointed out that in their case, they connect to PeopleSoft, which happens to be on an Oracle backend. And so you can allow the form to go out and get business data that's already out there. That way, if that data changes in the other system, the form, of course, updates automatically because we're not duplicating data. We're simply reading data from other systems. The other thing that we see is that these red asterisks indicate that a field is required. We talked a little bit about this earlier. If I try to submit this process without filling in a required field, you can see that I get an error. So there's none of this ability for someone to send a process in that's missing data. Instead, if we check on a box, or if we forget to fill in a box and we click in a button, then we're going to get warned by that. So in this case, I need to fill in some information. We'll go ahead and put my guy's name in there, John Doe, and his title will make him a senior purchasing agent. And then we've got a list of departments that we want to hire the guy into. So this drop-down list also comes from what we call an external data source. So this is coming from SharePoint. So I've got a list in SharePoint that has all of the departments in my company. And by the way, if I pick on a department, you will notice that the corresponding manager for that department appears over in that manager box. And that's important because remember, in our workflow, we have a swim lane called manager. Well, who will the manager be? Well, it depends on what department we're hiring the person into. So if I pick one department, it's going to select the right manager, and then it's actually going to use that information for routing purposes. So we call this dynamic user assignment. So your workflows can be flowed or can be sent to people, the appropriate people, based on metadata on the form. If something's an emergency priority or a high priority, you want to go to this person. If it's a low priority, go to another person. If the expense report is greater than this amount, if it's less than this amount, go to a different person. If it's one department, go to that department manager, and so on. So we can go through and set up our form to do all of that for us. So what we're doing is we're taking some of the business knowledge in our process, and we're putting those rules inside of the workflow engine. So in the past, what people did is they had to remember, well, if it's an emergency, I need to email these 3 people. Well, now we just simply ask them to tell us it's an emergency, and we'll take care of routing it to the right people on its own. Now, if I try to submit this process now, you can see I get another error message. Down at the lower left-hand corner, you'll notice we have a place to attach a resume, and I haven't done that yet. This is one of those custom controls that we talked about in InfoPath. So within InfoPath, I can design my form to allow for an attachment. So we want to make sure that we have this guy's resume on file, and we want to submit it when we submit the process. And so because I haven't attached the resume, I get an error message that tells me I have to attach a resume. Let me go out there and browse and see if I can find a resume. I've got a PDF file that represents John Doe's resume, and so we'll grab that PDF and attach it. So what we now have created is this forms-based workflow, this web form, with a document attachment so we can send it off to the next people in the process. So now that it's all ready to go, I can hit the submit button and it will send it on its way. Now let's talk about what's happening that since I've hit that submit button. There's a few things that are happening. The first thing is the information that I put in that form is being added to SharePoint. As we talked about earlier, everything on our form is stored in SharePoint. So if someone had the appropriate authority and they wanted to run a search, they wanted to look at some metrics or whatever, they could do that because that information is now in SharePoint. The other thing that happens is the workflow gets kicked off and assignments start to get made. So in this case, if we look at our flow chart, you will notice that the very first, we can get rid of this information since we're not really using that, the very first path that it goes down is to this manager. So right now there should be an assignment with the manager. So that was the next thing that happened. Now before we take a look at that manager and see what they see, let's just imagine here for a second that Mike is curious as to what's going on with that process he just submitted. So maybe it's been a couple days, and he wants to know, is it complete yet? Who's working on it? Where's it at in its life cycle? Well, Mike can go in and he can see his process. In this case, it's process number 61, and if he wants to, he can click on it, and it will show him some information about that process and where it's currently at. So he clicks on the process, and it opens up the form. Now, by the way, the form that opens is a read-only version of the form. Mike's already submitted the process. He can't go in and make changes. He notices that down at the bottom of the form, we also have some graphical history, as well as the history that shows us in this table where it's currently at. We see that Mike kicked it off, and we got the date and time that he kicked it off, and it's currently sitting with Alice in the manager review node. So if Mike looks up here at the graphic, he can see that sure enough, there's a black square around the manager review node, and that's currently where it's at. So again, anybody with the appropriate authority can go in and try to see where their processes are. Rick alluded to this when he talked about the credit memo request that customers may not see the credit yet, so they may want to know where it's at. Now, hopefully, Kitcher's turning around the credit fast enough that that question doesn't come up. But the point is, if it does come up, any person can go in and tell that customer, oh, it's currently sitting here, and it's got these 3 more people need to approve it yet before it's done. So we can see all of that information. So how does the manager, Alice in this case, find out that they have some work to do? Well, there's a number of different ways that someone can see that they have an assignment. Probably the most common way is right through email. So even though we're not using email anymore as our workflow engine, people still want to receive notifications through email. People live in their email. They get it on their PCs. They get it on their phones. They get it when they're at home. That's how they want to get communicated with. So Winshuttle will send out emails to let people know that they have an assignment to do. So if Alice comes in here and checks her email, we should see a new assignment show up. And sure enough, there's a new assignment. And a couple things about this email that shows up. You'll notice it's got a subject line, it's got a body, and it's got a couple other things within the email. All of that is fully customizable. So if you don't like the subject line, you don't like the body of the email, maybe you don't want these hyperlinks, or you don't care to have the history down at the bottom, that's up to you. You can customize this email to look like whatever you want. You'll notice the email also can be somewhat custom in that it has information from the process. So it says, for example, Dear Alice, a process has been submitted by Mike, and then the new employees for the purchasing department. So we took all of those variables off the form and kind of concatenated them together to build a customized email. So people can see information about what they actually have to work on right here inside the email. So that's one way that Alice can see that she has an assignment to do. Another way that she can see that she has an assignment to do is, let me log in as Alice. And we will see what Alice sees when she logs into the system. We also have a dashboard that shows everything that Alice has to work on. Now, Rick showed this as a screenshot in his PowerPoint. He's mentioned that when customer service people are looking at their task list, they can see everything that's currently waiting on them or currently assigned to them. And so that's what Alice sees here. She's got this task list, and it shows her, for example, the number of the process. We can see what activity she's been assigned, the date that it's due, and how long the thing has been running. And of course, if she clicks on it, she can get into that assignment, and then she can choose to approve or reject or do whatever she needs to do with that particular assignment. Going back for a second and talking about that theme of very little, if any, user training, let's imagine for a second that Alice doesn't know SharePoint. She's never been introduced to SharePoint. Maybe you don't have SharePoint in your company, and so people aren't familiar with SharePoint. Now, Alice certainly knows how to get emails. And so if she even doesn't know SharePoint, notice within the email we can embed a link that will take her to her assignment. So Alice gets this email. She says, well, I want to act on my assignment, so she clicks on that hyperlink. It will actually fire up her browser, log her into SharePoint, and take her right to the form where she can now make her decision whether she wants to approve or reject it. So imagine being able to roll out a new business system like Winshuttle Workflow and having to do 0 user training. When Alice gets this process, down at the bottom there's approve and reject buttons. She can see the form, she can review the resume if she wants to, and then make her decision. All she has to know is how to get an email, click on a hyperlink, and then render a decision, all things that Alice already knows today. So we're able to get these processes up and running very quickly with something like Winshuttle Workflow. So if Alice wanted to, she could, of course, go see where the process is. We saw that just a couple minutes ago when we were logged on as Mike. And then she can make her decision. In this case, she's going to approve the process, and it's going to send her to the next person, send it off to the next person in the process. We're going to go through just one more activity here, and then we're going to do some wrap-up, and then we'll take some questions. So now that Alice is done with this, it gets sent to the next person in the process, who is the HR person. Once again, let's go back to our email and check our email and see if we get a new email to the HR person. And sure enough, Carol has received an email that says that she has some work to do. And you can see, by the way, down at the bottom of the email that the history of this process is continuing to grow. So what's happening is every time someone acts on the process, a new entry is getting added, and we're keeping track of that information. Well, let's log in as Carol, and we'll do her activity. Now, of course, in a real environment, you wouldn't have to be logging in and out, but because I have multiple users on my system, I have to log in to make it look like I'm different people. Carol's got her assignment. She can either click on it here, or she can go back and click on it through the hyperlink in the email. They both take her to the same place. Now, what I wanted to point out is when Carol logs in, she's the HR person. And the HR person is not just simply reviewing information. They actually are going to add some new information to the form. So you'll notice what we've done is we've created what is called a form view, and we've added new information to the form. The top half of the form looks much the same, but notice at the bottom, we've added some new fields to the form. Now, these fields didn't display previously because they didn't mean anything to anybody. They mean something to HR, so we've created a view of the form that allows HR to see the information that's important to HR. It would have been counterintuitive to show these fields to the manager because the manager doesn't know when the start date is or the drug screening was completed or when the employee agreement was signed. So it just would have confused the manager. But we need to show it to HR so we can gather that information. Of course, the fields are required as indicated by the red asterisk. So we can go through and now start to fill this information in. We'll say we conducted the interview on the 7th. The drug screening was completed on the 9th, and the employee agreement was signed on the 11th. We're going to have this person start on the 28th. Now, if a probationary review is required, we've got a checkbox down there. I ask you to keep your eyes on this area below the start date. Currently, it's blank, but notice what happens if I check that box. A new field pops up, which is the review date. This is what we call conditional formatting. It gives us the ability to create a very intuitive form. So it doesn't make sense to show a probationary review date field if a review date isn't required. So I can set up InfoPath so that it shows a field only if a particular thing is required. And so you can turn different sections of a form on or off, have different fields be on or off, have different fields be required or not required based on the value of other fields. Now, in this case, I just used the math to automatically come up with a date. I think I did 90 days after the start date is when the review date is going to be required. So if I go through now, you'll notice that the workflow history shows me that it has moved past the manager node down to HR, so our black square is around HR. If I hover over, by the way, any of these previous nodes, it shows me information about the process. Last thing we'll do before we wrap up is we'll approve this as the HR person, which will send it off to the last person in the process. We talked a minute ago about the ability to view metrics. So all of this information that we've been putting in the system is being captured. The date that a user got something, the date that they acted on it, what their disposition was, whether they approved it or rejected. All of that's being captured. Rick mentioned at the beginning that you can't improve what you can't measure, and so those measurements are so important. And notice what you can do with those measurements. Rick showed a couple screenshots where they had extracted the information and maybe taken it into Excel to run some reports against it. You can also do things like create dashboards. So I've created a dashboard right here in SharePoint, and this dashboard shows me the average amount of days it takes for different people to do their activities, so the manager, HR, and so on. And you'll notice what it's doing is it shows us the goal. We want managers to get done in 2 days, HR to get done in 2 days, IT to get done in 1 day, and then it shows us the current value. Now, this current value is a live connection to that audit trail that Winshuttle is providing for us. So I can go in, for example, I notice we've got a little bit of a problem here inside of HR. Their average is 2.6. I would like to get them down to 2. Well, where's the problem? Well, let me see. I'm going to click on the HR activity, and we'll see where the problem is. If we go in here, we can see that on average we're taking 2.6 days. Our goal is 2. And I also notice that it shows me all of the things that went into making up that average. So notice that we've got 0 days for this one, 1 day, 3 days, 2 days. None of those are so bad, but here's one, 7 days it takes this one to work on. So something was wrong with process number 42 that caused it to take 7 days. Not only that, notice that when Carol is involved, the processes move pretty quickly. It's Bobby that seems to cause the problem. Remember that thing that Rick told us about them interviewing one of their employees to find out where their bottleneck was? See, now that we have this data, we can go in and start to do something about that. And the point is, you don't have to do anything to create this data. You create the form, you create the workflow, and as they're running, this data is being captured automatically for you. Now you can go against that data and start to look at it and make some decisions. So we're going to stop there, but let me wrap up by just giving you a couple things that I hope you take away from this webinar, and then I'll turn it back over to Teresa for some questions. The first thing I hope you take away is ease of use. You should have seen the ease of use from what you heard from Rick, the fact that they've stood up 17 processes, getting ready to stand up their 18th. They've done almost all of it themselves in the early days. They brought us in a little bit to do some question and answer and some hand-holding, but now they do almost everything on their own. So the ease of use. You saw me add swim lanes, create forms, and in a very intuitive fashion, not a lot of programming required. The other thing I hope you take away is the ease of use for the end user. So once we have one of these processes and forms published, we have a very intuitive interface. We can enforce required fields, enforce document attachments. When someone gets an assignment, they simply click on a hyperlink, 0 user training, and they're now participating in our process. And finally, the fact that all of the information and all of the data that's happening in this process is being captured in SharePoint. So whether you want to use that to form reports, to create dashboards, or to make decisions, all of the information is in the system, SharePoint, and so now we have the ability to do all kinds of wonderful things with that information. So with that, I will turn it back over to Teresa to handle questions and answers.
Perfect. Thanks, Derek. And I mean, also just to highlight the ease of use that you mentioned, there's a reason that Rick from Kitzler is on his way to a meeting to create their 18th process improvement, because Winshuttle is easy to create and change and deploy workflows. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and put my contact information on the screen and read off any questions that our audience has today. Our first question, Derek, is does this sync with AD?
Yes, you can run queries from AD. So for example, I had, when I logged in, it was able to go get my title as well as my phone number. And so you can get queries from AD. You can also connect to AD and make changes or updates as well. So if we would have actually finished this process through the end, at the very end, I have it going out and creating a new account for our new employee. So yeah, it has a bidirectional connection with Active Directory.
Perfect. And our next question is, does it have out-of-office delegations?
Yes, there's a couple things that we can do with regard to out-of-office. First of all, you can design in your workflow what we call escalation. So if something sits in a location for too long, it will escalate it either to a manager, to a colleague, or maybe it just goes around the person in some way. So you can actually design that right into your workflow. But hopefully that never happens. Hopefully something never sits a place too long, because people can manage their own assignments through out-of-office delegation. So we can go into the system, and if someone knows they're going to be out of the office, they can create an out-of-office delegation and say, when an expense report comes to me, send it to this guy. When a credit memo comes to me, send it to that guy. So they can set up their own out-of-office delegation. If by chance someone is out of the office unexpectedly, a manager can set up an out-of-office delegation on behalf of someone as well.
And our last question is, does this connect with any other back-end systems, example, SAP?
Yeah, so Rick talked about how they connect with PeopleSoft, And so you can connect with pretty much any back-end system that runs on a database or has web services available. Now, when it comes to SAP, there's a little bit different discussion that we would have because Winshuttle as a company has a whole side of their business that does wonderful SAP things, and Winshuttle Forms and Workflow, of course, connect to those products as well. So we can do bidirectional updates with SAP. You can run queries. You can create the new items. You can do HR stuff. You can do financial stuff, all with SAP, and it's really very easy to use. If someone wants to talk more specifics about what transactions we support and how we support those transactions in SAP, we'd be happy to. So just in summary, yes, we connect to lots of back-end systems, but when it comes to SAP, it's a whole new ballgame because we've got all kinds of capabilities there.
Derek, it looks like we've got one more question. It pertains to training. How is your training format?
We do training in a number of different ways. We, of course, do it based on the customer's request, what they specifically need. I'll give you the example of how we did training at Kichler. We did a couple days. I think it was 2 or 3 days. It was a year and a half ago, so I'm not sure I remember exactly, but I think it was 2 or 3 days. And the first day was what you'd call kind of the basic boilerplate training. We did some examples, and we used the book and all that sort of stuff. But what we did for the remaining days is we actually trained using one of their processes. So instead of us doing like an expense report or an employee onboarding or employee application, if you have no intent of doing that, we used one of Kichler's processes and trained on that. So not only were they getting consulting, design services, they were also getting training at the same time. So they got to watch our training consultant do the work on their form, and by the time the training was over, we had a form that was pretty close to complete. So we can do that. Some of our customers want us just to do training. Some want us to do consulting, and some like to take that blended approach where we actually consult while we train.
Perfect. And another question is there an automation reminder available after a defined time?
Yeah, there are a couple different ways that reminders go out or that notifications go out, we call them. One, you saw the emails that come, we call those assignment emails. So when someone gets an assignment, if someone doesn't act on that assignment, they will get a reminder, and you decide when that reminder goes out. So you could say, you know, the assignment's going to expire in 48 hours, and I want to send a reminder out in 12 hours. So you could do that. And then there's also past due reminders also. So if they still don't act on it, we send out a past due reminder. Those past due reminders, by the way, continue to go out at the frequency that you determine until the person finally acts on it or until some escalation takes place.
Perfect. And that's all the questions that we have for today. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our webinar. If there is any additional questions, my contact information is on your screen. Feel free to give me a buzz or shoot me an email with any additional questions. Or if you want to engage one-on-one, we could do that also. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.